Welcome to A Wild New Work. This is a place where we listen to the land, to the ancestors, and to the wisdom that still resides within us so that we can bring an old and sturdy strength into the present moment. I'm Megan Leatherman, and I'm your host today. Hello, friend, and welcome back to the show. I have missed you since concluding our last episode in the spring, and I'm so glad to be back here with you deep in the heart of summer. It is dry and smoky where I live in Oregon today, and I'm here with the first of 3 episodes that I hope are a source of deep hydration to you and your spirit in this time. Since I left the last episode in the spring, I have been undertaking a private podcast series for those in Eagle Creek, which is a community that I steward. And that series has been 8 episodes called Peasant Summer. And it was such a lovely experience and so rich and replenishing to me that I knew that I wanted to share some of that with all of you today, whether you are a member of Eagle Creek or not. So I'm here with the first of 3 of these episodes. Again, there are 8 total, but the first 3 are really robust. I hope you'll find them to be quite magical and inspiring and supportive to you wherever you are and whatever is coming up in your life right now. Peasant Summer is a series in which we looked at the experiences of peasants in medieval Europe and looked at different areas of their life to understand where there were robust, beautiful sources of support that we might pull on today. Peasants in medieval Europe underwent profound societal, collective, ecological shifts. They were dealing with scarce resources and intense hierarchy, and they were also at the crossroads of the Christianization of Europe and the encroachment of empire and the building of the state in Europe. So these people experienced a lot of challenge and also a lot of beauty. And I wanted to understand how they lived in order to bring some of that strength and resilience into my own life and into our lives here this summer in this context that also feels chaotic and like collapse. And there are many things that we are experiencing today that people hundreds of years ago also experienced, and they found ways to make meaning and beauty and joy even in the midst of that. And I wanted to tap into that this summer as well. So we covered things like peasant experiences with water, which is the 3rd episode in this series that you'll have access to. We also covered mundane and spiritual practices of spinning and weaving and how peasants made cloth and linen. We covered the spirit of home. We covered the harvest. We covered all kinds of areas that were really beautiful and communal and inspiring about the medieval peasant's way of life. So these were all housed inside of Eagle Creek, which is again a membership or a community that I steward, and people join Eagle Creek to support my work and make it sustainable for me to share this podcast for free and also write my weekly newsletter for free. And there are things that I share in reciprocity with Eagle Creek members as well, like monthly behind the scenes updates. They have access to book a tarot reading with me. There are supplemental things I'll make for them that go along with the podcast. Like last spring season, I did some extra work around old land spirits, and it's a way to just be in a deeper conversation. It's a quite slow and quiet community. I don't do a lot. Again, the primary purpose of Eagle Creek is to help make it so that I can do this work on the podcast and newsletter for free and that it's not all behind a paywall. So If you enjoy the next three episodes and you want to hear the entire series of eight, you can always become a member of Eagle Creek, and you can do that at awildnewwork.com/eagle-creek. But regardless, I hope you just absolutely love these three episodes and that you embrace the identity of peasant if it feels empowering to you. And today's episode will give you perhaps a different sense of what that word means and what about it might or might not resonate with you. Before we dive into today's episode, I just want to share three quick announcements. The first is that I have been updating the free resources page on my website each season. So if you are hungry for summer inspired resources, there's a page on my website at awildnewwork.com that has some free guided meditations that are connected to the summer season. There's a class recording on there that you could access. I'm happy to send you a summer snapshot via snail mail if you want to sign up for those. And it's just a nice way to kind of anchor into the wisdom and medicine of this season. And I will update for that for the autumn as well. I also want to let you know that I'm teaching a public class in two sessions. You can choose which works for you on September 16th and October 6th, and it's called Ancestor Speak. And it's about how to communicate with your own mighty dead. We're going to cover different ways that the ancestors will speak to us and how we can hear them, how to discern what your unique channel is, how you best communicate with the ancestors in your lineage. And we will also go through a guided trance journey so that you can perhaps tune in a little more deeply and visit an ancestral village to receive information or a connection that feels supportive to you. So if you have longed to speak with or hear from your ancestors but aren't sure where to start, or if you have tried on your own and it's been confusing or frustrating, or it's just coming in little spurts, I would love to have you in that class, and you can learn more at awildnewwork.com/events. And finally, if you are in the midst of a meaningful change in your vocation, or if you're feeling called into a different kind of work and also have material needs that are required to be met, then I would love to have you in Meant for More. This is a vocational guidance small group that I have run for a couple of years now. It's a very strong container for people who are ready for a meaningful change, who want to do good and meaningful work and also have bills to pay. And how can we navigate that edge and find ways to live into our callings while also existing inside of this capitalist context? So you can learn more about that at awildnewwork.com/guidance, and the next cohort begins September 30th. With that, I will take you into Peasant Summer now, this first episode called Are We Peasants? And I hope you deeply, deeply enjoy it. Hello and welcome to Peasant Summer. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so excited to begin this journey with you. And in today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about why I wanted to do this series, what I mean by peasant, and what I think we're invited to simmer in this summer. And I hope it feels like a wonderful beginning to this journey and that it opens up some new understandings of yourself and the context that we're in collectively, and also just what there is to really enjoy and deepen into for you this summer season. Some of the reasons that I wanted to do Peasant Summer are personal. One is just a time period that I love, the Middle Ages in Europe. I always find myself drawn to movies or books or shows or music about this period. It just feels really rich and alive to me. It feels like the end of one world and the beginning of another. It's a time when things shift, and we talk about this in Composting Capitalism. It's the time preceding capitalism when the Roman Empire collapses, feudalism becomes the dominant form of social relations, And then there is this great shift in power with the Black Death and with peasant revolts. And there's this opening where something different and truly egalitarian could have come to the fore. And instead, we see that those in power hold on to their power and find new strategies to cultivate that power. And that's what we know as capitalism today. But even with the larger social changes, and even though this time ended in the creation of a system that is immensely harmful to us and to our earth, there was still so much color and joy and vibrancy in this time. And I think the Middle Ages echo a lot of what we're experiencing today and could show us a way to be with what's here, to be with massive change, new technologies, plagues, wars, uncertainty. I know that my ancestors in Europe survived that time, and I believe that it's possible for us to survive this time as well, and not just survive, but really enjoy what short time on this earth we have. So part of it is just that I find this time period really interesting, and I think there's something about it that wants to come forward for us today. Some of it is also that this idea came up when I was just reflecting. I was in my backyard, just thinking about the upcoming summer and how, cash is tight right now for us, and we're not desperate, but traveling is quite expensive, and we're going to stay really local this summer. We've got a couple camping trips planned, but otherwise, it's going to be the garden and camp and pools and just what is right here in our community. And I feel an empowerment, a sense of empowerment, or like an opening of possibility when I embrace that rather than try to fight against it or think about what I don't have, or, we can't afford a bunch of camps for our kids. Like, we're just going to have to really slow down and be right here. And what could that look like? How could that actually be rich and deep and enjoyable? And for me, understanding myself in a larger historical context, and I'll talk about like whether or not we could actually call ourselves peasants today or not, but understanding myself in a different context, like peasantry, just brings up like a really rich, fresh understanding of myself and the fact that people before me have struggled and have had to make do with what they had and still found ways to find meaning and joy inside of that. So I hope that you'll really enjoy this series and that it creates a different sense of empowerment or beauty for you in your own life. And I feel like we're kind of on the precipice of this new understanding. I'm not sure what we're going to discover in this series. I have an outline, but as I'm recording this, I haven't done all of the episodes. We're going to be doing this journey live together through the summer season. So, why don't we root in first by talking about what the term peasant really means? The Latin root of peasant is pagensis. It's the same root as pagan. And one of its meanings was country dweller or the inhabitant of a rural district. So pagensis, pagan, peasant, it means country folk. And it's related, these two terms are related because paganism and the folk practices that existed for people before Christian, clergy came or before Christianization really took hold in Europe, pagan folk practices were much more difficult to eradicate in the country, out in the rural districts. And one of the terms for the country or the rural areas was the heath, where the heather grew out away from the towns or cities. So that's why you also hear about heathens, people of the heath, people out beyond civilization and civilized society. Generally, the term peasant evolved into a derogatory term to mean a person of inferior rank. And to be of the country or of the land was considered, uncivilized or uneducated. And it's interesting because today I know many of us long to be known as country dwellers, inhabitants of the land, a person of the heath. I want to be out there. I want to get away from civilization. I want to be listening to something older, bigger, wiser than human culture. And I wonder if you do too. And I wonder if there are still ways to create villages that are not closed off from the rest of the world, but that are on the edge, that are attuned to a different kind of rhythm, different education, different belief systems that are, animist and recognize the spirits of the land and all of the things that many of these people in this time period and place held on to still. So maybe we should talk about the time period that we're looking at. For this series, we will be looking at Western Europe for the most part, and we're looking at the Middle Ages, which is the period from the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD to about 1500, which is when we see the collapse of feudalism and the emergence of capitalism, which again, I talk about lots more in my class, Composting Capitalism, which you can take anytime now. And this was a period of incredible change. This 1,000 years or so, social relations are changing. Feudalism becomes a new way of relating. There are proletariat uprisings. The peasants are, resisting their constriction or the way that their labor is used to make a few people very wealthy and comfortable. There are brutal inquisitions happening by the church. There's incredible technology and art being made. This was also a time of enchantment when many of the old ways or animistic beliefs were still in existence, were actively being attacked by the church. And we see a lot of documentation about that in writings among the clergy. Again, most, if not all, peasants were not reading and writing. They had oral traditions and belief systems that are hard for us to investigate and understand, but we learn about them through the sort of derogatory work of clergy who go and document what people in different areas believed and the practices that were, against church doctrine. But we can learn a lot about what people believed in that time. There was lots and lots of change in this period, as you might expect in 1,000 years. That's plenty of time for a lot of change. But the pace of life was also so much slower than today. So even with everything changing and new things being created and new social norms coming to the fore and people resisting and uprising, all of this is moving at the speed of walking or running, at the speed of a horse, perhaps, or the wind if you're on the sea. But there were no jet planes, no, calling someone on your cell phone, no mail. Things were happening at a very, very different pace, and a lot could happen in that time still. But we don't see the same level of just like manic urgency that many of us are experiencing today. So I just sometimes I like to imagine myself in that time and what that would be like to know that, if I was able to read and write, if I sent someone a message, it could be days, weeks, months before they received it. If a beloved person went on a trip to a nearby village or, they were taking their goods on the road to sell, maybe years, if ever, before I saw them again. There was no electrical lighting to light the nighttime, so things are moving at the speed of night and day, that those are like real meaningful cycles. Our bodies are absolutely cued up to the circadian rhythm of this place. There wasn't screens to distract us from the present moment. It was just your mind, which can, of course, be very distracting, but Time really slows down when there are fewer distractions pulling at our attention constantly. And if you imagine living in a village in this time, of course, other people could distract you or other animals, and it's not often quiet on the land. There's birds constantly and things are happening, but there's no machinery. Imagine not hearing machines, no cars, no jets, no lawnmowers, just the sounds of nature, only nature and what could be created through nature, through humans. That is going to be a really different sensory experience than a lot of us are having today. So, who were the peasants in this time period? It's not true to just say that all peasants were the same or that they were having the same experience. Some of these peasants were serfs, and serfs they were people who were experiencing the remnants or the fallout of the Roman Empire, which depended heavily on slave labor. So instead of slaves exactly, people became serfs, which was sort of a step up from slavery. And slavery still absolutely existed around the world and in Europe at this time. But when we're talking about peasants, we're talking about serfs and free peasants. So serfs were people who were bonded to the land. So they weren't technically owned by a lord, but they were not able to make decisions for themselves without the Lord. They couldn't leave without the Lord's permission. They couldn't marry without his permission. They were beholden to work in his manor or on his fields. They could, however, inherit the land that they lived on, like the land that the serfs were given to farm and subsist themselves. That could be passed down through their family. From what I've read, serfs had a minimum of 5 acres for themselves, if not much more. And this was land that was theirs to grow food on or put livestock on and, essentially support themselves with. So even though being a serf was not a good thing, I don't want to be a serf. I don't want my life to be determined by others, although, I mean, how many of us are feeling that by the weight of capitalism today? How much free choice do we really have? But serfs did have important safety nets that we don't have today. We don't have land, most of us, that we can fall back on if absolutely needed. We don't have common lands that are even bigger than our own acreage where we can go and forage or hunt or collect firewood. We have to pay for our water. We can't just go and get it. There are many things that serfs had access to that we don't have today. And capitalism has created this paradox between being extremely vulnerable to, market forces. Like if the supply chains for grocery stores shut down tomorrow, many, many people would not have what they need to eat and survive. But the other side of this paradox is that when it works, quote unquote, even as it's destroying the earth, a lot of people can be very, very comfortable. So the serfs were probably not very comfortable. They are working to live and meet their own needs. They also have to work a certain amount on the Lord's estate, and we'll talk about that soon. And it's not the amount of work that you might think, but they were not completely free people. And I think my intention for this series is really to complicate the picture that we currently have about the Middle Ages and about the peasantry, because I don't think it was all bad. I'd really like to pop this bubble, this idea that we're so much better off than the peasants were in the Middle Ages, because I'm just not sure that is a completely true statement. So some peasants were serfs who, again, were not completely free, but did have safety nets like their own land and the commons and the community to fall back on. Some serfs, or some peasants, excuse me, were free. They were not bonded to the land. They could pay, a rent or lease land from a lord and live on that land. And own it or pass it down and pay a tithe to the Lord to be there, but they were not beholden to him. They could leave, they could marry, they could, you know, do make a trade. They could, yeah, they were just free to move about as they wanted to. And some peasants were relatively well off. So just like today, we are all part of the working class. And inside of that, there are some people who have a lot of resources and some people who have very little. And the same is true for the European peasantry. Some serfs had, a little bit of land. Maybe it wasn't very fertile land. They may not have had the ability to raise sheep and sell wool or have any extra income. Other peasants were, they had a lot of land to farm. They may have had an abundance of crops that they could sell or trade for at the market. They may have had their own kind of industry, like if they had opened a mill, people could make quite a lot of money grinding grains for others to make bread with. So there's a wide range of people's experiences of peasantry in this time, but it was about 80 to 90% of the population. So 80 to 90% of the population are making life possible for 20 to 10% of the rest of the population. And this is how it works inside of civilization. Civilization, meaning ways of structuring human society that are heavily resource dependent, naturally create incredible hierarchies where a large amount of people have to be working to make the food and build the buildings or pay the taxes so that a few people, 10 to 20% of the people, can be very wealthy or pursue other, you know, pursue politics or art or just be, billionaires. So this is the same kind of arrangement as we see today. Most of us are working and creating wealth, paying taxes so that a few people can be very, very comfortable. And if you have any European ancestry, chances are some or all of your ancestors were peasants. And you don't even have to have just European ancestry. Feudalism and peasantry existed in other parts of the world as well. In China, the Spanish created a similar system in the colonies that they colonized in so-called South America. So this experience of being a part of a great swath of people who are working to make wealth for others is something that I'm sure you carry in your own heritage and may carry still today. So, for Peasant Summer here, I'm really interested in exploring what was rich about this time and what about that time wants to teach us now. Again, it feels like there's something that we're meant to discover together this summer, something that will unlock a new understanding of ourselves or a new energy or just bring us into greater enjoyment of what we do have. There's a lot about the peasant lifestyle that I like, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. I also think there's something powerful in identifying with the peasantry. And this might not apply to everyone, but bear with me for a minute. I think a lot of us have been sold this story of class ascension that just isn't true and is becoming less and less true here in the United States. And I wonder if it still has its grips in you. This promise that if you will work hard enough and get lucky, or, yeah, essentially just work really, really hard, you can become nobility. You can go from being a peasant to being a noble in this society if you will just work hard enough. And of course, there are some stories about that being true. Of course, we want to be able to meet our material needs and survive and afford healthcare and be well. But how many of us are dissatisfied with what we have because we haven't fulfilled this conscious or subconscious dream of ascending our class? And what does it do? How does that help us in the long run? It doesn't. It helps those who are in that 10 to 20% because it keeps us working really hard to try to get somewhere that we probably will never get to. There is a lot of propaganda, a lot of stories about this rags to riches story, this possibility, the milkmaid being seen by the prince and being rescued and living happily ever after. And I'm wondering if there are other stories we could tell ourselves or other stories we want to simmer in about class and about what it means to make a meaningful life and about what kind of system or arrangement we want to be in or buy into. I also want to be sure as we move through this series that we're not, or that I'm not glorifying poverty because I know that there's another side to this coin that says that some people just always have to be poor, that it's just the natural order of things. I know some of you may have been poor your entire lives, and it's not fun. I'm not trying to make peasantry cute. It wasn't cute all the time. I think there's a lot about it that's beautiful, but I'm going to try not to glorify it or oversimplify things in a way that's unaware, although I do have a biased perspective, of course. My privilege, the things I've been lucky to receive, or ways that I'm comfortable inside of this system does inform my perspective, but I'm trying to find some kind of in between where we're not glorifying class ascension, but we're not glorifying peasantry either, that the problem is the entire system of hierarchy and domination and civilization. So I wonder if we could pull on the wisdom of the many, many peasants, thousands of people in the Middle Ages who were ready to tear down the entire system. One of the things we see after the Black Death, which killed 40 to 50% of the population in Western Europe, is this rise in a call to tear down the entire feudal system. And it did actually collapse because there were so many people who died, there were so few workers. Serfs could literally just leave their place or refuse to show up for work. Or, I'm only going to tend to this field if you pay me in coin extra, and I'm going to keep my land. Entire villages who just stopped paying taxes, stopped paying rent. This call that now is our time. The wheel of fortune is upon us. This is our time. We're going to bring down the entire system, the whole nobility, all of these oppressors who are, keeping us under their thumb and forcing us to work to support their lifestyles. And so again, there was this opening where a different kind of arrangement was possible. And history didn't play out that way in this timeline, but I wonder if we could adopt some of their fervor and their desire to really live. Imagine if you had just lived through the Black Death and seen so many people die. You would have a very clear appreciation for how precious and not guaranteed your life was, and perhaps a commitment to really enjoying it and having justice and living in a different kind of society. So I want to explore what was beautiful about this time and this lifestyle. I want to explore the enchantment and folk magic that still existed, even though Christianization had been occurring for many, many years, especially since the Roman Empire had adopted Christianity as their religion in I think, 380 AD. So Christianity's been established for a while by this time and differently in different areas. But even in the midst of that, there's a lot of really cool folk magic and pagan practices that survived. And yeah, I want to see what about this can bring us more empowerment and liveliness in our own lives this summer. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things I like about the peasant lifestyle at this time that we will be weaving into this series. The first is the pace of life, which I mentioned before. Imagine the pace of life with no cell phones, no email, no cars, no trains, no planes, just the power of nature. You can go as fast as a horse, a living animal. You can go as fast as the wind will push your ship. You can go as fast as you can run. Otherwise, things are happening at the pace of slow and easeful walking, the pace of day and night and the seasons. I think we would have a profoundly different sense of time, and I'm interested in cultivating some of that this summer. Even today, if we're lucky enough to have time off in the summer or be out of the school rhythm, there is this change in pace that becomes possible. The heat of the day, once things start to get really hot, the heat will slow us down. And I want to welcome in and play around with that different kind of pace. Could things actually literally slow down for you? Could there be fewer screens, fewer dictations about your time? Could you travel by foot instead of car? Could you travel by ship instead of train? Or could you find other ways to go slow, to put your clocks away or set your watch down? I remember last summer, my watch stopped working the day school let out for my kids' summer break. And it was like a very clear sign that I needed to shift into a different kind of rhythm for the summer season, that's one of the ways that we're invited to replenish ourselves and stay hydrated in this hot time. I like the peasant way of connecting to the land, the seasons, and the cycles. Being a peasant meant that you were dependent upon the agricultural cycle, which is problematic in many ways. Agriculture is what gave birth to civilization, and when it works, it can support a large number of people, but when it doesn't, it can make things very precarious. But almost all of the peasants in this time period in this place were living in alignment with an agricultural seasonal cycle, planting in the spring, supporting in the summer, harvesting in the late summer and fall, and then surviving in the winter. And today, so many people are very, very divorced from those cycles and even unaware of what each season has to offer, what each season teaches us, and how to even live in alignment with each season. How to, just like on a very practical level, like how do you dress for the seasonal shifts? What does your body need differently in summer versus winter? And I think this series could be an invitation for you to pay closer attention to what the summer is manifesting like where you are. What is the land where you are inviting you to adjust or come into? What are the beings on the land around you doing? And you may not be a farmer, but how would you like to sync up with this time? Are there fruits that you would like to harvest? Are there veggies you want to harvest? Are there plants that you want to just make sure and water or support? Are there, animals growing that you want to be around? Do you want to go find shade and water? Are things more dormant where you are right now this summer? And what might that show you about what your body needs? The peasants at this time were practicing a subsistence lifestyle. So this is a time before money becomes the primary or only real viable way to support yourself. So a lot of peasants wouldn't have had coin to spend on things at the market, let's say. They would have largely supported themselves through subsistence, which means that you grow your food, you grow materials to make clothing with, whether it's, flax or having sheep and shearing them and using their wool. You're growing things to make ale or mead. You're supporting yourself with the land and with your community and with your own hands. And I think there's a level of self-sufficiency here that I absolutely do not have today. Imagine having to make everything yourself. You may have built your home yourself. You may have, you know, like the clothing that you're wearing, someone made that, someone not just like at the market, but perhaps your own mother or grandmother or aunt or neighbor. Someone made the things that you're wearing and using. And that's really different than all of the materials we're using today, mostly being anonymous. not even knowing where the materials came from, who made them. A lot of us not having the luxury of being able to purchase things that are handmade or made with a high level of craft. But I also like the call to really make things work with what you have and the level of simplicity, the amount of stuff that these people had was so much less than what many of us have today. And I think I want to explore a little bit about how to live meaningfully and beautifully with less, but things that have been made with human hands and to, try to get better at making things work with what we have rather than depending on more money to go and purchase what we need or asking others to do it for us. Where is there an invitation into self-sufficiency or community sufficiency this summer? There's also a lot in this time that's happening for people around community, festivals. The church comes with their own holidays and feast days, but pagan festivals were also still part of this or were adopted by the church. There is a lot of enjoyment happening. There were a lot of festivals, and I think that's something for us to explore as well this summer. I want to explore a little bit about the commons. Again, serfs, even though they may have been very poor or not had a lot of land or not been able to leave and determine some things themselves, they still usually had land around them that was a safe place to go, where perhaps they had to ask permission of the Lord to hunt, or, there may have been restrictions in different areas, but they could still go out and just be. And a lot of us are going to be out in the wild this summer. And I don't know about you, but it gets really old. All of the, parking fees and wondering where private property begins and ends and not feeling like there's just land around where I can just walk out my door and keep walking and I'm going to go into a beautiful natural place without having to pay an entrance fee, etc. So I think that is a beautiful part of their lifestyle. I think the way that paganism lived on, even in the midst of Christianization, is beautiful. I want to pull in some of that folk magic this series. And the last thing I'll say that I really like when I learn about the people in this time is the way that they really thumbed their noses at the nobility, the way they decried the greed of the church and the clergy. We see that in the heretical movements of this time. These were not wholly complacent, sleepwalking people. We see constantly these like evidence of, legal skirmishes or complaints among the peasantry. We see peasant revolts and uprising as a declaration of their freedom. Federici talks about in Caliban and the Witch how the struggle in the Middle Ages was for freedom. The peasants were struggling for their freedom constantly. And what happens after capitalism becomes a dominant strategy and we start to see people displaced from the land, poverty increasing, food prices are surging, that the struggle rather of the proletariat becomes about just surviving. So in this time, there was a safety net of survival still intact that was strong enough that people could set their eyes on a larger goal, one of freedom. Let's take the whole thing down and do a different way of relating to one another versus when we see later on people are really just struggling to access grain and food that they need and just simply survive. So I want to pull forward some of the fire of the people of this time. So, what might it mean for us if we identified as peasants, if we kind of took that identity on and tried it on and like adjusted ourselves a little bit to come into alignment with some of these life ways or perspectives? I think the first one is understanding that our labor is propping up a small minority of people. So I encourage you to embrace this term or this identity if it helps you to remember that your labor, the money that you're earning, the goods you're buying or selling, your energy is going in to support a small amount of people who are getting very, very rich off of what you're doing. And there was a direct relationship to that for the peasantry. The peasantry could be on one side of the creek looking at the person who they were helping to get really, really wealthy. Or like they could look and see the manor where the Lord was feasting and they, just had a couple of bites of food on their plate. Like they could see it. Today, I think we're less confronted by it, perhaps, where it's obvious through like technology, like we're seeing it a lot, but I don't know if it's as directly felt as it would have been for peasants in the Middle Ages. So a lot of us are still feeling like it's normal to work for a wage. It's normal to work a lot. It's normal that some people have way too much and others don't. And I hope that identifying as a peasant this summer could help you to right size your expectations for yourself about work, to instead of feeling like you should be working really, really hard because that's what it means to be a good person and you're responsible, on and on. What if you are just part of this long story and large group of people that is being taken advantage of? And yeah, what does that mean about what you force yourself to do or fit into this summer? Could you do less because you deserve to live a life and you're being taken advantage of? I don't know if that will help any of you, but it's an idea. I also think if we identified as peasants or took on that sort of life way, we would understand ourselves as dependent upon and in relationship to the land again, where there's not that same level of separation that so many people in modern society are feeling, where we are so divorced from where our food comes from and the water that we drink. And the peasantry would have been very, very close, like literally intimate with the food that they ate. It would have been grown by their own hands or very close nearby. The water that they drank would have been from a place that they could walk to. It's so, so different than the way many of us are living today. Identifying as peasants would also remind us that we're part of a large and powerful class of people, and we may not be cash rich, some of us, but we have other riches, our senses, our body's ability to enjoy the colors, smells, and sensations of the summer season, our crafts, what we can do or shape through our talents. We have other riches like wild waters that we can swim in or even drink from. The choice at times, not all the time, but choice when we can to go slow, to change the pace, to put the watch down. We can make a choice to throw off guilt about not working as much this season and choosing to feast or dance or go lay on the ground to live in accordance with the seasons. And we have a real source of richness through embracing the magic that still flows through this world, that we can still tap into by connecting to the land again. Maybe it's not the commons, but maybe it's a backyard or a park or just watching the sky. Connecting to the earth is our source of nourishment, even if we're not growing our food ourselves. And this summer, we still have a chance to use our imaginations to grow into or dream into the kind of life we most want to live. What's really worth living? If life is short, what do we want to enjoy here? What do we want to make of it? Do we want to dream into village and what we might create with others or share our abundance and what it is we are growing or bring others into the abundance of the earth? I think that identifying as peasants makes it possible to understand the longer term arc of history, context that we are still in, this context of civilization and hierarchy and wealth inequality, and being part of a great mass of people who have lived through this history, who have resisted this way of being or have tried to compost these ideas so that something new can be made. and really claiming our place in that history and claiming our right to fully live, to really enjoy this season and what it has to offer us in our unique context and in our own unique ecosystems. So, Peasant Summer will offer you 7 more episodes on different aspects of peasant life. And I am focusing on the good here. It's true. I won't be focusing on shorter lifespans or poor dental hygiene or, all of the things that were still true, were also true for the peasantry in the Middle Ages. Of course, there were lots of downsides to living at this time, just like there are lots of downsides to living today. But I want to pull on the beautiful things, the interesting things about how peasants worked. You are probably working more than many peasants did. I want to explore eating wild berries and wild foods, dancing with the heat, becoming crepuscular, active at dawn and dusk. I want to explore what home life was like for these people. All of this infused with folk practices, practices of the people, practices of the country dwellers, and explore ways that you can bring that into your life now. So, I'm going to share an episode as well as a super simple ritual or activity that you can do to enjoy the summer more yourself. I should say, I probably should have said this at the outset. I'll say it now. I am not a historian. I'm going to make a bibliography for you and I will try to cite my sources as best I can. Some things are repeated across so many sources that I won't cite them exactly, but if something is really particular, I will do my best to cite it. But I encourage you to check out those resources, and I'm going to try to share what is agreed upon by historians academically, but I'm also giving myself permission to have fun with this. I am in conversation with my own ancestors about this project and learning from them directly. I want to infuse each week with the feeling more than just the facts. And I encourage you to see what you like, take what's useful, and leave the rest. I welcome your questions and reflections along this journey. I'd love to be in dialogue with you about this, and I'm excited to see what we discover together. To end this time today, I'd like to pretend or imagine that it's almost the summer solstice in a little village in Europe, a little village of peasants, and we're there with them, and we're preparing for the village feast. It's midsummer. There's extra loaves of bread that are baking. There's a new batch of mead or ale that's brewing, that's ready. There are wildflowers in full bloom. The days are long and warm. We're making flower crowns or crowns of oak leaves to wear for this gathering. There's plenty of food for everyone. The Lord has donated some meat. The musicians are warming up, and soon it will be time to dance and have fun and joke and flirt and celebrate the longest day of the year. And it's almost summer solstice here for us too, and this time. And we are under the same sun that these people were under. We are in the same seasonal cycles that they were in, and we're approaching solstice just like they did. And this is where we're going to leave it, where we'll pick up next time. Thank you for being here today. I'm wishing you a beautiful summer solstice, or a beautiful summer if you're listening after, and I'll be with you again soon. Take good care.